Rubber Von Ducker here, and today I'm going to be discussing institutionalised boing through the parachute payments. Now let me start by defining what boing is. Boing is a strategy that I thought was pioneered by West Bromwich Albion around the turn of the century, the 2000s. Obviously it's the name of their celebration where they like to bounce, but I thought it would also have been applied to what I perceived to be a tactic by the then chairman, Mr. Pierce, which effectively was get yourself promoted. Once you're promoted by a couple of interesting players before season ticket sales finish, once season ticket sales are over, no more transfers, and you survive with what you've got, or you go down with what you've got. Now that led to them effectively going between the Premiership and the Championship within this period. For instance, 2001 to 2, they were on promotion, and they were relegated that year, and then they made an immediate return to the Premiership, and then in 2004-2005 they did this season of a great escape where they stayed up, and then the following season they went down. So there was a constant movement between the bottom of a Premiership and the top of a Championship, and that was generally not achieved by big spending. It was generally just keeping a core of a squad together, I presume on relatively low wages, so you could survive in the Championship. Obviously at this point as well, the TV revenues, the gap between what you receive in the Championship and the Premiership probably wasn't as large, as I'll later demonstrate, so that would also have been a factor. But eventually they stabilised in the Premiership. They had a good 8-year run until 2017 when they were unfortunately relegated. They have of course gone back up this season, and to be honest they probably should have gone up last season if it wasn't for the determination of the Villa players to get up to save the club effectively. So yeah, that's boing in a nutshell. It's basically going up and down between the two, spending very little on players, and presumably taking a nice little profit, which I believe Jeremy Pierce was very heavily in favour of. As well as that, they'd obviously sell star players when they got relegated, bringing in more revenue. And the benefit of that is you can then rebuild in the Championship. Obviously if you're rebuilding a squad in the Premiership, everyone knows you've got great big TV money. The minute you drop down to the Championship, everyone presumes you're spending that money on wages, which you will be to some degree. But I think in Mr. Pierce's case there'd be a nice little gap between, and that allowed them to buy new players in relatively cheap because no one expected them to have that much money once in the Championship. So that's the boing tactic. What do I mean about it being institutionalised via the parachute payment? Well, effectively the change to the parachute payments, which I believe came in the 2015-16 season, which narrowed the payments from 4 payments to 3 payments of a bigger size, is actually enforcing this tactic on the Championship or the highest level Championship clubs, or to be more accurate, those that have been in the Premiership. So I've got a table here of the parachute payments, and we can actually get an idea of how much it changed the situation. For instance, we've got here QPR. They're the only club who stayed down, who are still in the Championship at this point. The other 2 clubs that were relegated in their season both bounced up, although Hull have since come back down and gone into League One. Now here we can see they've got the 4 payments: 25.9 million, 31.1, 16.6 and 17. Presumably that was the last year it was paid. And as you can see there's a massive increase in the value of the payments. So the first payment 25.9, but presumably because we're in a new window of TV rights, the second payment goes up to 31.1, which I think they were meant to be identical in the first 2 years, and then they dropped down in the next 2. So that's the way it used to be. If we now look down at some of the clubs that went down in the following year, we've got Aston Villa here, probably the easiest to show because it covers a whole 3-season period. Got 40.9 million in the first year, 34 million in the second, and 15.5 million in the third. So you can see again there's been a massive jump in the initial figure to 40 million, and that's what all the clubs that got relegated in that season received. Now you can see here Norwich only got 2 payments because they'd only been in the Premiership for 1 year. To get the third payment you have to have been in for at least 2. Newcastle obviously promoted, so they didn't get any further payments. And if we follow on to next year, it goes up slightly to 41.6. And then if we go up again, 42.6, and it stabilises there for the next year at 42.6. So you can see a gradual increase of the payments over that time. Well, I say gradual, quite a dramatic increase of those payments over that time. And that's a major issue for Championship clubs. You've got teams coming up from League One into the Championship, like Rotherham, who are probably the smallest club by revenue. They're coming in and working on a budget of £8 million. That's including TV rights. So we're talking about Championship clubs getting about 5 million from TV rights for a season. And obviously these clubs would get that 5 million, so you're probably talking 47, 48 million for their TV rights. And they're probably higher than what Rotherham will receive because they're perceived as bigger clubs having come out of the Premiership, so there's more of a demand or a greater brand there. So you could see clubs like Villa probably making 50 million on TV revenue, and that gives them a dramatic benefit to these clubs. Now obviously in the case of Aston Villa, we were in a considerable mess, so a lot of this was eaten up by wages. In fact, all of it would be eaten up by wages. But then when you look at clubs like Norwich, who don't have quite a severe wage bill, okay, it's about 50 million, but that's covering most of the wage bill. So if you take all the revenue they receive in the year, they're probably still making a profit when they pay the wages. Add to that player sales coming down for the first year, quite a profitable little enterprise. Now the interesting thing is that there's 19 teams on this list that have received parachute payments. 9 of them have gone back to the Premiership within this period, so we're talking the 4-year period. Some of them have done it twice. So for instance, Cardiff City here, well, they only went up once, but they came down, took parachute payments, went back up and back on parachute payments. Same with Fulham. Fulham have done it twice because they've come down, got the parachute payments, presumably they came down, 2014 season's just the next one along, and they've taken the parachute payments, then they've got promoted, they finished 5th and won the playoffs. That's them in the Premier League. Then they've come down, they've had 1 year of payments, and guess what? They're back in the Premier League this season. So Fulham are really the poster boy of what I'm saying, is that you either take the money and reduce your squad and still remain competitive but keep some of the money, or maybe you keep the squad, as Fulham have generally done, take a hit on your payments and get back up, knowing that you're going to be able to clear off the money with the 100 million you're going to receive in TV rights from the Premier. And then you've got Queen's Park Rangers, who are kind of another side to this. Like I say, they're the ones that got the 4 payments, but they have actually got a very nice bank account. They don't seem to have pushed to get back into the Premiership as much, possibly a wise idea, but they've basically taken a large stack of cash. I think they're sitting on about 50 million at this point here in cash, which this season may serve them well with the situation in the Championship. If you're not aware of what I'm referring to, you can see my other video, Champageddon. So they're in a position where if those players are going cheap in the transfer window, as I suspect some will be, they're in a position to take advantage. And as I suspect there'll also be pressure on a downward on wages, they may be able to keep the wage bill relatively low as well. Because obviously you've got clubs that are on the brink of going bankrupt. It's all very well sitting on the bench trying to take Premiership money, but if your club's going to go bankrupt, at some point they're not going to pay and you're going to be working for nothing. So to some degree you might be better moving earlier than later, because if you're moving outside the transfer window, you're not going to get as much money in your wage. It's going to be difficult. You might not even be able to move. You might not even be able to register with a new club until the January transfer window, and all the time you're not earning a wage. So I think once players and clubs realise the financial situation in the Championship, I think some players will be more open to reducing their wages than they were before, simply because they probably won't be getting those wages. Better to take a small hit now and go early than to wait and then find there's a whole bunch of you in the same boat and the wages get pushed down and down and down. Now, as I've pointed out, Fulham are probably the poster boys, but there's others that have done this as well. I mean, you've obviously got Burnley here. Hull did it once, although sadly down. And the figure of 9 for clubs going back up is interesting as well, because that's 3 times 3. And now that the parachute payments are 3 years, if you've been in the Premiership for 2 years, then is it the same 3 teams going up all the time? And that would appear to be the case. Obviously you've got Wolverhampton, they're still in the Premiership. Cardiff for example of this, they're doing the same as Fulham. Norwich and West Brom as ever because obviously here they're getting 2 seasons of parachute payments. They could have had a third. They've got promoted, so they're back up. So we see that it seems to have gone one of two ways. Either I think for the case of Bolton and Blackburn, maybe that parachute payments should have been more severe, although one would assume that they should have been able to reduce their wage bill in the previous 3 years. But obviously, I think both of those now are League One. I'm not sure about Blackburn, they may have come back up, but both have had stints in League One recently. Reading, they're in financial trouble, I would argue. They've mainly due to their wage bill, which they should have cut by now. But yeah, they're overspending on wages, unless they've got it down since 2019. But I mean, their wages in 2018-19 season were twice their income, and they've got no parachute payments. So they're another club that could be going that way, although I think that's more down to current issues rather than legacy issues of being in the Premiership. Wigan, obviously in trouble, but only because of things off the pitch. Burnley back up, Newcastle back up. And you can see the I would argue, better managed teams that drop down straight back up. So whether that's boding well for Bournemouth and Watford, we'll have to wait and see. I think Norwich, again, have potential, depending on what core players they keep. Sunderland, obviously, unfortunately, down to League One. Middlesbrough, not doing the greatest. Swansea, I can see Swansea. They've got one more year of parachute payments this season. So I can see this the season where they really push to go up, as with Stoke. And then Huddersfield Town, they've got another season of parachute payments. Depending on where their squad's at, and I honestly don't know, they could be challenging. So effectively, these parachute payments give a massive advantage to the rest of the Championship. And the other interesting aspect is, what happens to the parachute payments that Burnley would have earned, or Hull in this year, or Newcastle this year and that year? Does it go to the Championship, or does it stay with the Premiership? Because the one benefit of the parachute money for the Championship is it's money that's flowing around in their area to some extent. So maybe they've got a chance of selling a player to one of the clubs and bringing in some money to reduce their own debt or their own wage bill. But if the parachute payment just goes to the Premier League, well, there's less money then in the Championship. So I mean, I do know they do what's called solidarity payments. Maybe if parachute payments aren't paid, the money gets paid into that and goes down to the Championship. But this situation is basically going to mean we're going to see, for the majority of times, the same clubs going up and down is going to become just a competition between the Premier League and the Championship, which obviously disadvantages everyone in the Championship who isn't getting parachute payment. I think it's also the ones that do drop out will be the ones that get into financial trouble. But equally, we're seeing in the Championship clubs like Derby and Reading paying insane amounts of money to try and catch up to get promotion. And if it doesn't work, well, then you can end up like Charlton or Ipswich out of the Championship with a lot of debt, and you're kind of struggling to survive. So that's effectively the idea I'm putting forward, that the parachute payments in their current form effectively give a massive advantage to the relegated clubs, and I suspect we'll see it again in the next season. I think we might see some of the clubs that dropped down, maybe Bournemouth, coming back up. Not sure about Watford. Norwich, I can see it as well. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if their finances aren't very nicely worked out and they have a plan for this. Obviously, TV money as you get lower into League 1 and 2 is less, so they're in a similar situation with the Championship, although the parachute payments aren't as big between those, so it's not as destabilising as this. End result, I think, will be Champageddon, as I've said. I don't know what the answer is to stop this, maybe going back to a 4-payment system, but then the clubs that are coming down are going to be, well, we're going to struggle to pay the wage bills, and it's going to push us into financial difficulties, which is true. The only answer to that might be to do a Norwich and not spend heavily, or a Baggies, but then it's just, you're still going to be in the same situation. It's still going to be the same clubs going up and down, as long as they're relatively well maintained. So I don't know what the answer is. I think the Championship definitely needs to get more money. I think it is way too top heavy now, but how you redistribute that money, I don't know, and how you get agreement from a Premiership, I don't know, because they're clearly not going to want to give up any more money than they already have, especially at the moment. So yeah, that's institutionalised boing. I hope you are all staying well, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.